Welcome to the Connected Health Podcast. Today's episode is a little bit different as we're joined by Ellen Lubenski, who's here to share her powerful story about benzodiazepine misuse and withdrawal. Ellen was diagnosed as autistic in childhood, but later was misdiagnosed with bipolar type 1, leading to a prolonged treatment with highly addictive antipsychotic medications, including several in the benzodiazepine family. As many of you know, benzodiazepines can be profoundly addictive and come with serious side effects. Ellen will share how she was never fully informed of these risks, otherwise known as a lack of informed consent, which is the process of being fully educated about potential risks and benefits before agreeing to a type of treatment. As a result of the overuse of these drugs, she developed several debilitating conditions, including tardive dyskinesia, a disorder characterized by involuntary, repetitive movements. I invite you to listen closely to Ellen tell her story in her own way and absorb her personal journey and her deep passion for this topic. At the end, she'll share some resources on where you can follow her journey and stay connected. Thank you so much for your attention and for giving space for this important conversation. I've got Ellen Lubenski on the podcast today, and she's been through an incredible story with antipsychotic drugs and her journey with mental health. So welcome to the podcast, Ellen.
Thank you so much. I greatly appreciate your having me here. So as a child, I firmly believed that I was autistic. People dropped books on me and I would scream. I didn't have therapy as a child. I wasn't given coping resources as a child. Instead of understanding, I went to serious self-harm at 11 because the system failed me. And I attempted at 16 because there was nothing there for me. At 20, I was put on antipsychotics. I firmly believed that I was really autistic, and this is something that happens quite frequently, that people have autistic meltdown with high anxiety. And I was misdiagnosed as bipolar 1. Between ages 25 and 45, I was physically disabled by tardive dyskinesia. And for 25 years, I hid in silence. Barely anybody knew why I was physically disabled and I was on antipsychotics, because I thought that people would discriminate against me. I thought that people would think I was crazy. And really, the Americans with Disabilities Act would have protected my job. So no, I had asked for years to be let off antipsychotics, not because I didn't think there was any chance that it would free my body and I would recover physically. I thought that it might free my mind. In reality, no, I had a holy wow recovery. I recovered from 20 years of disabling tardive dyskinesia. I know of 2 other survivors. I found 2 other survivors on the planet. Hopefully there are more. There are between 600 and 800,000 people suffering from disabling tardive dyskinesia in the country, and there are millions worldwide. So my recovery was very rare and not something anybody else think would happen. I went into true benzodiazepine withdrawal last May, and I had no informed consent. I had no idea of the detrimental effects of benzodiazepines. The warning is 2 to 4 weeks or physical dependency may result. I firmly believe that you should trust a physician to tell you whether physical dependency will result. And I, as an attorney, freely admit that I knew nothing flat. These are things that people should be aware of before they start taking psychiatric medications. My personality changed. I couldn't feel things when I was on antipsychotics. I was a different person. Now I went public, a little over a year ago because nobody in my community will admit that they are on psychiatric medication withdrawal. These are things that should be spoken about publicly. I post public on 6 platforms, and I have never met anybody in person in benzodiazepine withdrawal. So these are things before somebody starts taking psychiatric medications, they need to be aware of the risks. Most psychiatrists give you, 15-minute appointments in which they have very limited time in which to tell you the risks of psychiatric medications. They give you pills. That is the easy solution to drug you, because I firmly believe this is big pharma that pushes pills. If I had had changes in my diet as a child, that could have prevented my suffering. And these are things, no friend of mine would voluntarily take benzodiazepines for more than 2 to 4 weeks, unless something like MS, given my experience. And yes, I previously stated I am suing a psychiatrist right now. Most people do not believe that they can sue psychiatrists because psychiatrists are often immune from suit. And I, as a medical malpractice attorney, I can sue. Most attorneys will not take cases for psychiatric malpractice because they are incredibly difficult and costly to prove. But these are things that I speak up about, and it was very difficult for me to accept that, this was malpractice. And I stand my ground on things that are very important to me. I have now reported 2 psychiatrists this year. Reporting is something that anybody can do. It's a quick form. Anybody is able to do that very quickly. But I firmly believe that people should be given therapy, breath work, meditation, going outdoors. I firmly believe that you should be allowed to take a break. The 80-hour work weeks that attorneys generally have, that is not a healthy way to manage things. Pushing yourself that hard is not healthy. I'm a graduate of Rutgers Law School, top of my class, or close there too. I used to work at the SSI project at Legal Services in New Jersey. At Legal Services, the attorneys and the staff knew almost nothing about the detrimental effects of psychiatric medications, which I found profoundly disturbing. The attorneys would tell people that they needed to take psychiatric medications, that they should take psychiatric medications, because I firmly believe that this is because of issues from funding from welfare. Offered to give them a free training on the dangers of psychiatric medications because it was profoundly disturbing to me that people on TikTok knew more about the detrimental effects of psychiatric medications than the attorneys at Legal Services. Now, this is incredibly disturbing to me. I was urged not to give people job resources when they could work and wanted to work. And I firmly believe that this is because of issues from funding from welfare. I saw time and time again that people who wanted to use holistic means to solve mental health issues were denied benefits. If they wanted to use ice packs or breathe through panic attacks, Social Security disability would routinely deny them benefits. And I think that this is something that should be addressed and changed, because many people do not get disability benefits because the system does not accept people who do not wish to take psychiatric medications. And these are things I would like to advocate for and work to change. Almost all of my bills in psychiatric medication withdrawal are unreimbursable medical expenses. I am lucky enough to have the resources for such care. Many people, to get off psychiatric medications, have to lie to their doctors. And I think that this is extraordinarily horrific, that people do not have doctors that trust them. I have doctors who know that I am not an addict. I have never misused a substance. I have never smoked a cigarette. I have never been drunk. I've never used illicit drugs, but I am in benzodiazepine withdrawal. I am going to be creating a charity to fund life coaches, subsidized life coaches for withdrawal, because these things are not covered by insurance. The things that have been recommended to me by my doctors, such as massages and acupuncture, are not things that are within the resources of most people. However, there are many things that are within their resources. Getting cold packs or doing insight timer and doing breath work and meditation. Those are things that are within most people's resources. Going outside and exercising. For many people, you do not become physically dependent very quickly. There are some people for whom psychiatric medications are effective and physical dependency does not set in quickly. For some people, they work, and that's fine. For me, they have been incredibly detrimental. So, these are the things that I wish to spread awareness about before physical dependency sets in. I have suffered tremendously, but not nearly as badly as many people. There are many suicides. There are many people who go to seizures. There are many people who have akathisia, which is inner restlessness. These are things that I am almost certain will not happen to me because I have resources. People spike blood pressures. I spiked blood pressures briefly at one point, but I am not even spiking blood pressures anymore. People often, if I go to the ER, I'm told, you're fine. If I tip my jar of Valium, I can go to the ER and I am trusted that I am not an addict. There are many people for whom that is not the case. I mean, there are two kinds of addicts. There's those who are labeled as addicts because their doctors cut them off cold turkey from medications, which means cutting them off abruptly, and those who are drug seeking. And that's very different. There are those who are addicts, who are actually addicts. And the treatment for addicts is very different than the treatment for those in withdrawal, in benzodiazepine withdrawal. There are very strange things that have happened to me, and things are day by day for me. For a while, I was having trouble folding my clothes. I have been a profound insomniac, on and off, sometimes getting 0 to 2 hours sleep. Since the last night of my bad taper off of clozapine, which is the antipsychotic I was on. A bad taper is when they take you off of a psychiatric medication too quickly. So I have been, a profound insomniac at times since November the 13th of 2022. And, every night I hope for sleep. And, it's great success when I get 8 hours of sleep. But when you are not sleeping well, it is very difficult to function very well. Sleep issues are one of the biggest concerns in withdrawal. And that's what is most difficult for me at this point. But things come in waves, and it is not a serious health condition because this is something that will end. You have to listen to your body. And at first, I thought this was going to be a quick process. I thought that I could be off benzodiazepines by the end of September. And then I thought maybe by the end of October, then the end of February. Now I'm looking at, probably almost 2 more years to go in withdrawal because I have slowed my taper, and you listen to your body. For some people, you can go faster, but for me, it is a very slow process, largely because I have been on psychiatric medications for 28 years straight right now. I am physically dependent on both liquid Valium, which is a benzodiazepine, and on liquid baclofen, which is a muscle relaxant that was used to take me off of benzodiazepines. I am also at 150 milligrams of lithium, and I take Synthroid. I'm perimenopausal, but that's different. The things that would have happened to me in withdrawal would have already happened to me. I have not gone to psychosis. I firmly believe I've never been manic or even hypomanic. But, if things were going to have happened, they would have already have happened. I have reported Dr. Claudia Baldessano, but I did not go to suit. But I have records showing that she prescribed 19 pills of clozapine when I was taking only 10, which was the antipsychotic that I was on, to avoid then mandatory neutropenia tests, which are white blood cell tests that are used to tell whether your white blood cell counts are low. She failed to do regular lithium levels tests when I was taking lithium. And she failed to do regular thyroid level tests when I was taking Synthroid. I asked for years to be let off antipsychotics. And I was told that that would mean that I would likely go manic. That I was told we just don't take people off after this many years. So I went back for an in-person investigation, and they are taking my complaints very seriously because I firmly believe that I was not provided informed consent. And I firmly believe that what she did was due to funding from Big Pharma. And I accepted this because it was the easy solution. It was something that was easy for me to do. It was not something that I could go to appointments, and she allowed me to have appointments every 6 months or something, and she trusted me. And therefore, I trusted her. I firmly believe that you should trust a trusted physician to tell you whether you will become physically dependent within 2 to 4 weeks. I became physically dependent very quickly. How is a patient supposed to know whom to trust? I had the same psychiatrist for 25 years, and I trusted her completely. And she failed to fully inform me of the risks of being placed on benzodiazepines. And these are things I accepted. I accepted because I was told you needed to be medicated. You needed to take medications, or no, you would go mad. When I applied to be admitted to the bar, I had to pay for letters from attorneys to state that I was not going, that I could be admitted to the bar, merely because that I was on antipsychotics, not because of any act or omission on my part, which I found profoundly disturbing, that the system tells you that you have to, that basically you are crazy because you're taking psychiatric medications. I don't believe in being called a psych case. I believe in normalizing mental health issues. Struggles should not be stigmatized. There is a lot of discrimination in mental health. People are not treated as humans. They are treated as psychiatric patients. And I think that this is highly detrimental. It shouldn't matter what color you are or your origin. You should be treated as a person. Being able to advocate for yourself. Self-advocacy is something that is extraordinarily important. Being able to speak your piece and stand up for what you believe in. And, these are things that I stand up for because there are very few people, especially attorneys, who speak about the things that I speak about, which is why I speak publicly about these sorts of things. Because, there are many people who are suffering across platforms, but people do not talk. People hide in corners. People think that they should not be speaking publicly when they are struggling. And truthfully, though, you should be reaching out. You should not feel that you have to hide in corners. You should not feel that you are an embarrassment because you are struggling with mental health issues. I do believe in mental health. I do not believe in, diagnoses or in stigmatization based on that. I believe in giving yourself a break, for treating yourself with kindness before you even think about ingesting psychiatric medications. These are things that are, to me, extraordinarily important. Going outside and enjoying nature, spending time meditating, being able to sit with your own thoughts is extraordinarily important. So, I clerked for the Chief Justice of the New Jersey Supreme Court, and I've always, told him that I will be a merciless advocate for what I believe in. He had no idea when I clerked for him why I was physically disabled for 20 years, because I hid. I went back to him in person. I wrote him and told him what had happened. While I clerked for him, I was so disabled that I could not walk to the handicapped parking spots. And he allowed me to use his personal parking spot because I was, too disabled. And he had no idea why, because I was hiding. I didn't feel like I could speak my truth. And these are things that, had I felt like I could speak my truth, I would have been much better for me because I hid. I didn't tell anybody what was going on. My personality was very different. I got very nervous before depositions beforehand. And now I speak publicly. I do lives with the best of them. So these are things that are very important to be discussed publicly and openly. And people should not be hiding in corners when they are struggling. The things that I have gone through are, I had no idea whom to trust. And I have made many a poor decision this year and not known which doctors I should trust. And I freely admit that. But many people do not have anybody that they can trust. They don't have any doctor who will trust them to know that they are not misusing a substance. And I am lucky as anything in that respect. But it doesn't always feel so lucky when you are in withdrawal. I have applied for Social Security disability benefits because I have letters stating that I'm 100% disabled. I think it is highly unlikely that I will receive benefits because I do not believe I'm a psychiatric case. I stated that I take liquid Valium because I'm at risk of seizures if I don't take it. No, I think I am years out into a hearing, and I am very unlikely to get benefits. No, there are many people in withdrawal who do not receive benefits for psychiatric issues. I firmly believe that had I been given resources as a child, this entire year could have been, my life would have been entirely different if I had been given coping strategies as a child. And, the system failed me. My parents did not know what to do when I was struggling. And the system did not give them resources when I was a child. The resources are now more widely available than when I was a child. Now, there are many more therapists, who are willing to have firm boundaries against medicating children and do not jump to medications as the first resort. And I believe it should not be the first resort by any stretch. I mean, if it works for you, that's fine. Pines are, I believe, the worst, maybe up there with opiates. Maybe opiates are as bad to withdraw from as benzodiazepines. I have friends for whom other psychiatric medications work. Benzodiazepines are far worse than any other psychiatric medication in my book. They did not help me at all. They helped me very temporarily, and I became physically dependent. So I take them not because they have any psychiatric benefit, but because I know that if I do not take them, I will go to seizures within a certain amount of time. So, I take them because I have to, not because they give me any therapeutic value. I'm going to go and take liquid baclofen when we're done with this because I am physically dependent on liquid baclofen, which is a muscle relaxant that we use to get me off of benzodiazepines. I'm going to take it because I know that I will feel awful if I don't. This is something that is incredibly unfortunate that I am physically dependent on baclofen. These are things that did not have to happen. If I had known the risks before I ingested baclofen, I would not be physically dependent upon it. And I had no idea. And that is part of the lawsuit that I filed, that I did not have informed consent before I became physically dependent on baclofen. And, it's something I absolutely have to do. I take it because I will not be okay if I do not take it. But, there are strange things that happen. This is day by day. There's days that I've woken up and I thought there were pimples all over my face and looked in the mirror and, luckily, there were not pimples all over my face. This is day by day. There are weird things that happen in withdrawal. My muscles are extraordinarily tight, and this is withdrawal. At one point, I was barely leaving the house because I was too exhausted. It's both physical and it's mental. There were times that I would spasm wildly. I have a website, ellenlubenski.com, that has reels on it. Some of them are quite disturbing, with me spasming wildly in withdrawal. These are things that nobody should have to go through. And, I wish just before this happens, there's prevention. There are many things that can happen beforehand. I want to spread awareness before people become physically dependent, and also to tell people that if you do wish to get off psychiatric medications, which is, a very individualistic choice, that you have to go slowly. You have to listen to your doctors and follow medical advice. I have a website, ellenlubenski.com. People should feel free to follow me. I post public 6 platforms. I currently do lives on LinkedIn at 8:30 on Thursday mornings and twice a week, normally on TikTok. You can feel free to private message me on any platform. I cannot give medical advice. I cannot give legal advice, but I can advocate for people to make informed choices and to find resources that are appropriate to help them. I didn't know any, and I freely admit that I knew nothing flat when I became physically dependent on benzodiazepines as an attorney. So, feel free to reach out, ask questions, never be afraid to ask questions. I mean, that's my purpose, is to let people know you can always question what is going on in the system.